Hey folks, David Stewart here. I'd like to talk a little bit more about Final Fantasy XIV, specifically the story of A Realm Reborn. That is the base game for the current version of the game. The 1.0 version of the game, of course, is no longer accessible via regular means, so we're skipping that. And we're going to talk about Realm Reborn, the main quest, if you will, up through the killing of Ultima Weapon and, kind of some of the follow-up stuff that happens after that. I already did an early impressions video, so if you want some of those opinions, you can watch that video. I want to focus on the story for this one, and in this case, I found the story for A Realm Reborn to be a very classic JRPG story once I just kind of got into the main quests and started doing it, and I'd like to go a little bit deeper into what exactly I mean by that, because I think they did a very good job with it. So before I get into the story, let me just say that first and foremost, I still find Final Fantasy XIV to be an MMO. It plays like an MMO. It has MMO gameplay. In that sense, it is not really a JRPG. The focus on story, however, in this case is very much like a JRPG, the way a story is executed in a JRPG. And that is because most JRPGs, particularly the classic Final Fantasy series, maybe up through Final Fantasy XII even, the story really takes the form of an Odyssey format. There's different kinds of story structures. The Odyssey format really comes from its namesake, the Odyssey. That is to say, you have characters moving around various locales, and in each new location, you have a new conflict requiring a new resolution, and each new location will get you a little bit closer to your goal. So Odysseus is sailing around the sea, landing on various islands that will either set him back or maybe move him a little bit closer to his goal of returning home to Ithaca. Maybe he lands on an island, say with Polyphemus, the Cyclops, and has to figure out how to escape that. That's the basic format of the Odyssey. If you want a modern version of that, that would be The Hobbit. Each chapter of The Hobbit is a new location with a new little adventure story in it, and it moves you closer and closer to the Lonely Mountain and eventually defeating Smaug. That's really the format that you get in most JRPGs. A really good example would actually be Final Fantasy IV, which I've talked about on the channel. There is a grand central conflict to Final Fantasy IV, and that conflict tends to grow a little bit as you go through the plot, but really it's formatted in a way that you get to a new location. Maybe you can buy some new upgrades and stuff. There's some new characters there. They have their own conflicts. Maybe you meet the Spoony Bard. Maybe you meet Tella or someone like that. Maybe you meet the Ninja Edge. And in his town, they need something being done. And so you actually end up doing a little bit of a sidetrack story that keeps you more or less on the path towards your ultimate goal. That's really what an Odyssey format is. And so the point of a plot in a JRPG is not so much to have a large epic plot, though it feels that way, but to move the player through various set pieces where they can experience new challenges, new monsters, new scenery, new levels, new aesthetics, all that kind of stuff. So it's to move people through various set pieces as they play the game. And if you take a couple steps back, especially with classic games, you realize that really is most games in a nutshell, that you are moving through various set pieces, experiencing new and interesting challenges, even if it's something as simple as like Super Mario Brothers, where you go to the next level, it looks different than the previous level, it has different enemies, it's laid out differently, it provides a different or increased challenge. That's kind of an Odyssey format, even though there's no real plot to something like Super Mario Brothers. So that really is the format of Final Fantasy XIV, and it works really well for an MMO that is built around a quest-based leveling experience. You're going to find similar experiences, say, in modern World of Warcraft or in something like the Elder Scrolls Online as well, where there's a heavy emphasis on progressing through quests or experiencing various different stories. The way it works in Final Fantasy XIV, which I think is great, is that if you're playing through the main quest, it will send you off to a new location that you have to walk out to. And when you get there, of course, you can unlock the Aether Crystal that lets you teleport to it later. That will give you a little bit of a story that has to do with that particular location. And then, of course, there's a bunch of side quests. So ideally, if it weren't for the XP buffs, this is the way the leveling really would have gone for me. There's a ton of XP buffs if you are low level in the game right now. So this experience was slightly disturbed in the sense of trying to level one character up to max. But you'd get there, you'd do the main quest, maybe you'd be a little bit low for the main quest, but you'd have a bunch of side quests, and so you'd do all of those and experience a whole bunch of different little stories that have to do with that physical location, whether it's like Drybone Camp or it's like Camp Tranquil or one of these little locations out past one of the main central cities, the main 3 city-states in the base game. So you experience lots of those little stories, you level up, then you're ready to do the next part of the main quest, which takes you off to another location, and it's arranged actually really well so that whatever level you are to do the main quest, that's more or less the levels that you're going to encounter with the side quests in that location. Then there's other ways to level up too, such as the leave quests, a couple of different ones that are usually available in each little questing hub. So that's great. It provides a really smooth leveling experience. You feel like you are progressing through some sort of main story. There is that big conflict at the end. You get some cutscenes that will slowly and surely reveal to you the nature of the conflict which you are experiencing. It's very similar to a classic Final Fantasy game where you don't even really know the entirety of the conflict early in the game. You are an explorer going on some basic quests. Maybe it's like go save the princess from the cave, and only after that do you start to realize that there's maybe a bigger, maybe a bigger world out there for you to save. Also, what I would say is great about this original story, besides getting you through the leveling process and getting you to go out and explore the world and experience it on your quest up to level cap, which I believe was level 50 originally, is that by the time you get to the end of this quest chain where you finally fight the ultimate weapon, you fight Gaius, you fight this, I don't remember her name, but she's in love with Gaius, and you only find that out when you kill her. You encounter all of these characters that you've seen, and you've seen them exposed prior to that. You know who they are by the time you get to fight them, and you know them on more of a level than just a quest text, like what you would get with a classic MMO, where it'd be like, here's this boss that needs to go die in this dungeon. No, you really know who Gaius is, and you really want to defeat him by the time you get to actually face him. You really feel like the ultimate weapon is a significant boss that you have to take on. Now, when I did it, it was fairly easy, but that's really neither here nor there. In terms of story, it's a very impactful sort of final conflict. It's kind of like the Death Star. You got to go and blow up the Death Star at the end of the movie. You got to go and defeat the ultimate weapon at the end of the Final Fantasy XIV Realm Reborn story. So overall, I liked it, and I felt like it did its job really well, which is to have you explore the entirety of the world, go to different locations, and experience those different cultures. I really liked the Coerthas Zone's story, which had to do with a large, very religious, elvish population that was suffering from this fake inquisition being done by their enemies, and it all kind of comes to a head before you get to move on and encounter the next little area. And you do the entire quest just to get access to Cid's airship, which you will need to get to the next part of the quest. And it's just a great example of what I'm talking about, is where you get to that location and you experience a new small little self-contained story with a conflict and a resolution, and you help bring about that resolution, and it's very satisfying. And at the same time, you get to explore the background of that world and feel like you are a little bit more of a part of that world as you play. Now, I also happened to level a couple of classes during this entire playthrough because my experience buffs were so good. Eventually, I was way higher level than the main quest, so I rolled other characters to just kind of be at the same level as the main quest. And so the characters that I ended up playing past 50 at least were White Mage and Bard. So I want to comment on those stories, and also will briefly comment on the Rogue story, even though I haven't finished that one up. But each little class or job that you take on has a story associated with it. I really appreciate that in Final Fantasy XIV. That's something that disappeared out of World of Warcraft many years ago, but it was a great flavor that the game used to have. This idea of a class fantasy, especially the rogue quests in World of Warcraft, where you had to go steal things or go infiltrate this little area and steal something, that really made you feel like you were playing that class. So the White Mage story, it's pretty bland. I'm going to say that there's really not much to it. It involves like a character who refuses to use damaging spells and refuses to take her power from the wild or whatever, and is using her own life force to heal things. And It's okay. Same thing really with the Bard storyline. I found it a little bit more engaging. The Archer storyline there's two, I'll divide it into two halves. The Archer, and then you evolve into the job class. But the Archer storyline is about, this arrogant Archer and his conflict with this semi-outsider. And eventually that's resolved and everybody finds their place in the Archers Guild. Then you move on to being a Bard and you experience this story through a series of quests where you eventually learn that your trainer who's giving you the Bard quests can no longer really engage in combat. He's like lost his will to fight, and you experience some of his past tragedies and what makes him the way that he is. And it's a much more interesting, I think, quest experience than the other things I experienced with, say, going all the way up through White Mage. I also did Rogue, and I didn't do Rogue all the way up through like level 50 Ninja, but Rogue I thought was a very good attempt at a class fantasy. You do lots of little instance quests that at least will ask you to stealth past things, but it's not nearly involved as you got, say, with something like World of Warcraft, where you had pickpocketing and sapping and all these other weird little rogue abilities. But I appreciated the gesture towards it, and I felt like the characters involved with those quests had a lot of fun personality, and it did explore more of the pirate flavor of the pirate city, Limsa Lominsa. Eventually, I'd like to explore more of the class quests and class stories as we go along. I started Samurai, haven't really gotten that far in that one, but I do appreciate that you have class quests and you have a little bit of a story that goes along with your class. That's something that I feel like has been missing in MMOs for a while, so it's nice to have that back. They're not always going to be like really super engaging or interesting. Like with White Mage, there's just not that much to it, but I appreciate that it's there, and at least any of these quests are not so time-consuming that you feel like there's some sort of slog in getting through a class. Rather, it's fun to unlock the next level of a class, and it usually gives you an upgraded weapon or item to make your experience a little bit better. It gives you a little piece of gear to help you on your way, and I appreciate that as well. So that's it. That's my rundown of the Realm Reborn story, my analysis of it. It's in the Odyssey format, which is typical for most classic JRPGs. And indeed, it did feel like a classic JRPG as I was going along with it as far as the story goes. The gameplay, however, is still very much an MMO. The overall arrangement of the game is still very much an MMO, and that is something that I like because I enjoy playing MMOs. So it really is a good addition, I think, to the overall format of the MMO. If you were playing a different modern MMO, if I just use World of Warcraft as an example, instead of having a main quest, you tend to have a lot of these breadcrumbs in various expansions, and I think I appreciate the main quest approach a little bit better. It just really lets you know what is the main story of what is going on, what is really important for you to focus on for the overall conflict of what they're trying to do with the game. Most Warcraft expansions have a main story, but you don't always know like what the main actual quest is. Rather, you end up in a quest hub, there's a bunch of quests, I guess you're going to do them all, and then you get some breadcrumbs, go to the next town, and then you do the next quests. So it's nice to have a little bit of focus here. I think it does a really good job. So leave me your thoughts down below about Final Fantasy XIV and the story in particular, and I'll give another video rundown for the next expansion as we get through that, or if I find a class series of quests particularly interesting, I might do an analysis on those. So far, I'm still having a good time. I'm playing on Zalera, I think, and my character's name is Aphela, A-P-H-E-L-L-A, Docentia, D-O-C-E-N-T-I-A. Check out my fantasy books on Amazon, and I'll see you guys around. Have a great one.